So way back in 2013, Joey, who's our current CTO, and I built and launched a product called Quay. Quay was the first private Docker registry. And when you really think about it, the difference between a private Docker registry and a public Docker registry is authorization. So our requests were often taking the form of how do I add organizations to the platform? How do I add teams? How do I model teams that are a part of other teams? And these features were really features that we had to deliver in order to deliver on the promise of being a private Docker registry. We were constantly struggling with our authorization engine because we had chosen something that wasn't quite as flexible as what we needed. We chose to do authorization using joins in our database. Things like recursive queries prohibited us, or the lack of recursive queries prohibited us from being able to do recursive nested teams, for example. Eventually, the Quay journey culminated in being sold to CoreOS in 2014. We stayed with CoreOS from 2014 until their eventual sale to RedHat in 2018. While at CoreOS, we were still building out Quay into a massive business. You can actually still go and buy Quay from RedHat today. It's called RedHat Enterprise Quay. And we were also working on CoreOS's product called Tectonic. Tectonic was, if you think about it, the first unbundled cloud provider. So the idea for Tectonic was that you would bring in compute, network, and storage using Kubernetes, and then you would layer on higher level services. Think your blob store, document database, media compression engine. You'd bring in those services using what we called operators. And operators were software that runs other software. But one of the challenges that we always had with Tectonic was how do we replace the IAM service that any other cloud provider would have if we can't even enumerate the higher level services that the user is going to bring to the platform? How do we do that in a way that's still fast and scalable? Ultimately, like I said, we ended up selling CoreOS off to RedHat, and we were at RedHat in the summer of 2019. So in the summer of 2019, Google released the Zanzibar paper. The Zanzibar paper details how Google does fast, flexible, reliable authorization for all of the internal services at Google. So that's Google Docs, YouTube, Google Cloud IAM, the Google Drive suite, Google Groups themselves. And we read the paper and we really recognized that they were onto something special. In this paper, they detailed a way to build an authorization system that could run with maximal uptime, huge amounts of scalability. Google runs it at millions of queries per second across billions of users and tens of billions of objects, and in a flexible way that it could support all of the services that I was just talking about. After reading this paper and mapping that back to the problems that we had seen at both CoreOS and our own product, Quay, and then eventually at RedHat, we decided, let's go and take the concepts from this paper and bring them to the rest of the world so we can solve authorization for everyone. And that brings me to August of 2020, which is when our company was founded, 5 years ago today. We were on a mission to fix access control for everybody. We believed that our experience gave us some unique insights into the problem, and the fact that we had tons of experience building infrastructure, tons of experience with system programming, and building scalable services made us uniquely positioned to solve this very tricky problem for the rest of the world. We took the concepts that we were pursuing for fixing access control for everybody using the concepts in the Zanzibar paper, and we applied to the winter 2021 batch of Y Combinator. This is a really unique time in Y Combinator's history. So this was their first fully virtual batch, and we all had a lot of learning to do together about how to run a program like Y Combinator virtual. They've since moved back to in-person, but the program was great. We learned a lot, and at the end of the program, that culminated in our seed round of fundraising, led by our wonderful partners over at Workbench. Fast forwarding a little bit to June of 2021, I had the opportunity to present my now favorite paper, Zanzibar, to the Papers We Love YouTube audience. So Papers We Love, if you're not familiar, is a group, it's a set of meetups around the world where people present on papers that they find truly inspiring. Like many other things, Papers We Love was running virtual. But I thought this was a great opportunity to show the world about why I was excited about the concepts of Zanzibar and why it's such a foundational paper and something that the concepts can really apply broadly. That video went on to get about 18,000 views across AuthZed and Papers We Love's YouTube accounts, which was a great stepping point for people to learn about Zanzibar. Fast forwarding a little bit to August of 2021, we decided that we needed a really tangible way, a really practical way for people to understand the concepts that we were talking about and the concepts that we were trying to bring to market. So we said, how can we teach people in a way that they can actually relate to? One of the things we realized is that all or virtually all developers know how GitHub works, right? We've all interacted with it. We know how we can store code. We know how we can interact with repositories, the various access permissions, access levels, etc. So Jimmy, our CPO, and I decided, let's model the GitHub permissions video, or let's create a video modeling GitHub permissions and post it to YouTube. So we did it in one take. We just went through and we went into the AuthZed playground and we modeled GitHub permissions live. This video went on to get 14,000 views on YouTube. And now, to this day, when I go into a customer call, people will say to me, oh my gosh, I already know you because I watched your modeling GitHub video on YouTube. Another fun tidbit about this video was that the authorization lead at GitHub commented to his coworker, wow, they just open sourced our authorization model for the whole world to see. So that was really interesting to hear that level of validation from somebody who was so in the know about the problem space. Moving on a bit to late September of 2021, we decided that we needed to open source the core of our offering. So in 2021, the idea of opting for a commercial closed source database seemed rather alien. So we decided that open source was the best way to get the word out there and really to help the community understand that fixing access control was our first priority. When we open sourced SpiceDB, we were on top of Hacker News for like 24 hours. And this was really what introduced the world to AuthZed and SpiceDB. Then people would go and dig into everything that we had created so far. But it was a really great opportunity for the world to learn about and even discuss the concepts that we were bringing forward and the software that we had created to do so. Fast forwarding a little bit to July of 2022, we created a product and launched a product called AuthZed Dedicated. Fun tidbit about AuthZed Dedicated is that we launched the product 2 weeks after we already had a paying customer. The customer decided that what we were doing was really, really important and something that they really needed, and they were willing to accept it in a pretty underdeveloped state. AuthZed Dedicated, the product, is based around the idea that we'll put an entire copy of our stack right next to your workloads. So why would we do that? It seems like a painful way to run a service. The reason is we wanted to be able to offer our customers minimal latency. So when you're making an authorization request, you really want to make sure that you're minimizing latency to give the end users, right, our customers' users or our customers' customers, we want to give them the best possible experience. It also was a way to eliminate noisy neighbors. When everything is dedicated to the customer, there's no resource contention or anything like that to deal with. And we were able to offer it on all of the cloud providers using a private networking feature that gave them the security to treat this as if it was their own infrastructure, but the ability to basically pass off the complexity of managing it and running it to our team. And this was really an inflection point for the company. So to this day, AuthZed Dedicated is our flagship product, and it's the way most of our customers are operating our services today. Fast forwarding again a little bit, I want to take you to May of 2023. In May of 2023, we were approached by a company you may have heard of, Netflix. And Netflix had a simple ask. They said, we like the concepts of SpiceDB, but we have a few very tangible ways that we need to be able to bring the concepts of ABAC, or attribute-based access control, over to SpiceDB and solve some very strategic problems. The good news was we already had our caveats feature designed, and we pointed the team over at Netflix to the caveats feature and said, does this sound like what you need? The design for it was done in the open. And the Netflix team said, yeah, that sounds like exactly what we need. And so we decided to embark on developing this feature together. So Netflix agreed to be a design partner for the caveats feature. And all of the work culminated in a blog post that we wrote together about our experience working together. And this was another inflection point for the company because a lot of the objections that people have about buying from a small startup go away when you hear the phrase, if it works for Netflix, it'll work for me. Moving on a little bit to February of 2024, we launched a product called Materialize. Materialize is an advanced product for SpiceDB and AuthZed users. Materialize allows us to basically compute the transitive closure of who has access to what, And it lets us answer questions like, I want to show the 10 most recently edited documents, which is very easy to do using your normal relationship database. But I want to show the 10 most recently edited documents that I have access to. And when you have a complicated access control scheme, that can actually be quite difficult to do. And so we created Materialize to solve this niche, to solve this need. We pre-compute the exhaustive list of who has access to what, and we create an API where users are able to syndicate what's happening in their permissions database over to their main database so that answering those questions becomes as simple as a join with the table that represents who has access to what. And we watch for changes in SpiceDB, and we syndicate those changes over to that main database. So the main database is always kept up to date, regardless of how complicated that policy is. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is a very critical feature for some of our biggest customers. And it's also only available to our SpiceDB customers who have a demonstrated need and who are quite sophisticated. That brings us to June of 2024, where we announced our Series A fundraising. I don't want to bore you with the machinations of startup life, but this is a really interesting validation point that proves that investors are seeing the excitement that we're seeing in the market. Moving forward a little bit to September of 2024, we published the results of a really impressive scale test that we ran in our team. We took AuthZed dedicated to 1 million queries per second on top of CockroachDB, which is a flagship data store provider for us. We took our system as far as we dared pay for. So we could have taken it farther. There was no signs of it slowing down. But what this meant was that the scalability of AuthZed was no longer a question for our customers. And all of a sudden, we noticed that everybody else who was trying to play in the market got very quiet about how scalable their systems were. All right, let's move on to January of this year. So January of 2025, we launched our expiring relationships feature. This was driven by a customer need. So one of our largest customers came to us and they said, we understand that we can do expiring relationships with your caveats feature, but we would really like something native built into the platform itself. If you build expiring relationships using our caveats feature, it would involve a manual cleanup process, and it's not even trivial to figure out which relationships need to be removed after they expire. So what we did is we went and we designed this in concert with the customer, and we built it and we launched it into our system. And now it's available for everybody to use. Moving forward to very recently, in June of this year, we launched AuthZed for AI, or as we call it, AI authorization. This is not something we initially set out to do, but we looked at our portfolio of customers, and we realized that we're already helping some major AI players with their authorization infrastructure. So we decided to really tell the world about how we're doing that and what some of the best design patterns are for AI authorization infrastructure. And you can see that at our AI authorization page right on our landing page. And that brings us to today. Today, I am excited to unveil that we have been working on a version of AuthZed Dedicated that we run called AuthZed Cloud. The biggest difference between AuthZed Dedicated and AuthZed Cloud is that AuthZed Cloud can be self-serve. You can go and sign up for it today. In fact, I encourage you to go and sign up for it today. And we're bringing the power of AuthZed Dedicated into a more traditional infrastructure as a service package. So unlike AuthZed Dedicated, where you need to be involved with our team, we have to sign a contract, and then we go and deploy infrastructure on your behalf, with AuthZed Cloud, you can go onto the platform, put in a credit card, and be off to the races with AuthZed Cloud today. We'd love to hear from you if this event was valuable and if we should host more of these. And enjoy the rest of the show.